The Chicago Rippers, a cult of serial killers. The Chicago Rippers, also known as the Ripper Crew, were a group of 4 men who terrorized the Chicago area in the early 1980s, abducting, torturing, and murdering women in a series of brutal and sadistic killings. Led by Robin Gecht, the Ripper Crew was not only a gang of murderers but also a twisted cult that practiced satanic rituals involving cannibalism and mutilation of their victims. The group was responsible for the brutal murders of at least 18 women, between 1981 and 1982, and their crimes shocked the nation due to their sheer brutality and ritualistic nature. The Chicago Rippers targeted vulnerable women, often prostitutes, and subjected them to horrific acts of torture before killing them. The leader, Robin Gecht was the ringleader of the Chicago Rippers. Born in 1953, Gecht had a troubled childhood and exhibited disturbing behavior early in life. He was known to be deeply involved in Satanism and occult practices, which he incorporated into the murders. Gecht had once worked for the infamous serial killer John Wayne Gacy as a handyman, which later raised speculation about whether Gacy had influenced his violent tendencies. By the early 1980s, Gecht had gathered a group of like-minded men who shared his sadistic desires. Together, they formed the Chicago Rippers, a group that committed some of the most heinous murders in the history of the city. Gecht convinced his followers that the murders were part of satanic rituals and that by mutilating and consuming parts of their victims, they could gain supernatural powers. The Ripper Crew members. In addition to Robin Gecht, the Ripper Crew consisted of 3 other men, Edward Spritzer and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokorales. These men were fiercely loyal to Gecht and participated in the murders, seemingly under his control. Each man played a role in the abduction, torture, and eventual murder of the victims, making them a tightly knit group of sadistic killers. Edward Spritzer, known for his willingness to commit the most violent acts, Spritzer was directly involved in many of the killings and showed no remorse for his actions. Andrew Kokorales, the younger of the Kokorales brothers, Andrew was particularly brutal and participated in the mutilation and cannibalism of the victims. Thomas Kokorales, Thomas was more hesitant than the others but still played a role in the murders and the gruesome rituals. The ritualistic killings. The Chicago Rippers operated with a specific modus operandi that set them apart from other serial killers. They would drive around Chicago in a van, looking for vulnerable women to abduct. Once they found a target, they would kidnap the woman, and take her to Gecht's secret location, a small satanic shrine in his attic. There, the group would subject the victim to unspeakable horrors. The ritual typically involved the following steps: abduction. The crew would lure or force women into their van, often targeting sex workers or women walking alone. Torture and mutilation. Once in their hideout, the victim would be tied down and tortured. The most disturbing aspect of the Ripper Crew's ritual was the removal of the victim's breast while she was still alive. Gecht believed that this was a necessary part of the ritual. The severed breast would be passed around to the other members of the crew, who would each take a turn mutilating it with a wire or knife. Cannibalism and rituals. In a horrific act of cannibalism, the crew would then eat parts of the mutilated breast. This was reportedly part of a satanic ritual led by Gecht, who believed that consuming the victim's flesh gave them power. Murder and disposal. After torturing the victim, the crew would kill her, usually by stabbing or strangling. They would then dump the body in remote locations, often leaving it mutilated as a gruesome calling card. The sheer brutality of these crimes, combined with their ritualistic and cannibalistic nature, shocked law enforcement and the public alike. Notable victims. The Chicago Rippers were linked to the murders of at least 18 women, though the actual number of victims may have been higher. Some of the most notable cases include Linda Sutton, one of the first victims. Linda Sutton's mutilated body was discovered in a field near a hotel in May 1981. She had been kidnapped, brutally tortured, and killed. Her breast had been removed, a signature of the Ripper crew's ritual. Shui Mak. In May 1982, 30-year-old Shui Mak was abducted, tortured, and killed by the Ripper crew. Like their other victims, her body was horribly mutilated. Rose Davis, another victim, Rose Davis, was found in 1982 with similar mutilations. Her case, like the others, bore the hallmarks of the Ripper crew's brutal killings. These murders terrified the Chicago area, and the police struggled to find the perpetrators, as the crew was meticulous in their abductions and disposal of bodies. The capture of the Chicago Rippers. The downfall of the Chicago Rippers began when one of their victims, Beverly Washington, survived an attack. In October 1982, Washington was abducted by the Ripper crew and subjected to their brutal rituals. They had cut off her breast and left her for dead, dumping her body by the side of the road. Miraculously, Washington survived and was able to provide the police with a description of the men and the van they had used to abduct her. Using the information from Washington, law enforcement intensified their search for the killers. This led to the arrest of Robin Gecht and the other members of the Ripper crew. When police raided Gecht's home, they discovered the attic shrine where the group had performed their satanic rituals. The shrine contained occult symbols, candles, and evidence linking the crew to the murders. Under police interrogation, members of the crew began to confess, though Gecht himself never admitted to the killings or the rituals. Instead, Gecht claimed that his followers were responsible for the murders, distancing himself from the crimes. However, the overwhelming evidence, including witness testimony, and the confessions of his accomplices, led to Gecht's conviction. Trials and sentences. Robin Gecht was sentenced to 120 years in prison for his role in the crimes, though he was not convicted of murder directly, due to a lack of concrete evidence linking him to the actual killings. He remains incarcerated to this day. Edward Spritzer was initially sentenced to death, but his sentence was later commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Andrew Kokorales was also sentenced to death, and he was executed by lethal injection in 1999, making him one of the last people to be executed in Illinois before the state abolished the death penalty. Thomas Kokorales received a life sentence, but was paroled in 2019 after serving over 30 years in prison, which sparked outrage among the families of the victims and the public. Psychological profile and motivations. The Chicago Rippers were driven by a combination of sadism, sexual violence, and a perverse form of occult worship. Robin Gecht, in particular, was believed to have a psychopathic personality and an obsession with control and domination, which manifested in the horrific ways he led the group. Gecht's fascination with Satanism and ritualistic violence provided a framework for the group's activities, and he manipulated his followers into committing unspeakable acts of violence. Experts have noted that Gecht's influence over the other members was likely the key factor in the group's formation and violent behavior. The other members of the crew were willing participants but seemed to follow Gecht's lead in carrying out the brutal killings. Legacy and impact. The case of the Chicago Rippers remains one of the most horrifying and disturbing examples of organized serial killings in U.S. history. The brutality of their crimes, combined with the ritualistic nature of their killings, left a lasting impact on the Chicago community and law enforcement. The case also raised important questions about how individuals can be manipulated into participating in extreme acts of violence, particularly when under the influence of a charismatic and psychopathic leader like Robin Gecht. The case of the Ripper crew serves as a chilling reminder of the potential for sadistic violence and the dangers of cult-like devotion to dangerous ideologies. Though most of the Ripper crew members remain incarcerated, their legacy of terror and brutality continues to haunt the annals of American true crime history.